What's up, everybody? There is a slight audio issue with the introduction to the podcast this week, but instead of re-recording it, I just decided to record this little disclaimer. It only lasts for 15 or 20 seconds, and it's kind of funny, so just don't worry, it'll fix itself pretty soon. And thank you all for tuning into the podcast, as always.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Martian MMA podcast. I am your host. My name is John, also known as the Martian, here to talk about the UFC card going down this Saturday, headlined by a rematch between Marcin Tybura and Serghei at the UFC Apex. Only 10 fights this week, so should be a pretty short podcast for us. And the card top to bottom, fellas, it's not looking good. It's really not. We are in the midst of a significant drought right now. The Australia pay-per-view is next week. That event looks really good, but the 304 pay-per-view didn't really deliver. The fight night last week in Abu Dhabi didn't really deliver. This card looks terrible, so we're in the middle of a rough stretch right now. And thank God for betting lines. Thank God for wagering on these fights because, man, I just don't know how anybody could possibly care about these fights if we weren't betting on them. But that's what we do here, and that's what we're here to talk about is the betting lines for these cards, which we're going to get into in 1 second. I think last week was in between a decent and not so good week for me. I wouldn't go as far to call it bad, but I wouldn't definitely call it good. I had some things that missed. I was wrong about the Bedoya fight. No value on Muhammad Yahya. Elvis Brenner didn't really read that fight too well. The co-main event with McCall didn't really predict that one too well. Had some good signs though with the Sam Hughes fight. Predicted that one well. Gaziev and Murzakanov getting by without too much trouble. Mackenzie Dern, we bet her and had her in that fight. The Figueiredo fight, the Chiesa fight, the Umar fights, I predicted them all pretty well. So it was an all right week. Didn't bring home too many winning wagers, but it was just not a super confident week of bets overall. So I was happy with last week. Sam Hughes was the highlight. Her live line, her just winning that fight was just electric. I really liked that fight a lot. That was a lot of fun, and predicted that one really well and got in on some huge plus money wagers to help us profit on the card last week. So that is enough about last week, enough of a prelude into this week, and we're ready to start things off. 10 fights, and we're starting things off with a rematch in the women's strawweight division. Stephanie Luciano taking on Tybura-Alencar. Alencar is the dog, plus 135. Luciano coming back minus 155. So we're starting the card with the rematch. We're ending the card with the rematch. And this fight was on the Contender Series last year, ended in a draw. Alencar was able to take Luciano down and win the first 2 rounds with her wrestling, and then gassed out really badly, got outstruck and hurt a few times in the 3rd round for a 10-8 round. I don't really think that was a 10-8 round. I mean, it was dominant, but we see much more dominant rounds not scored 10-8. So I was a little surprised to see that one scored 10-8. But in a rematch here, I honestly think I'll be going with Luciano to win this one here because if we're talking damage, I mean, Luciano has, 90% of the damage upside here. She's the much better striker. She lands harder, and Tolito was able to get her down, was able to get into some decent positions, mounted her once in that fight, but I just didn't really see anything threatening from Alencar's top game. Her submissions weren't there. She wasn't throwing any ground and pound, so she really got ideal conditions for the first 2 rounds of that fight and didn't really do much with it except hold Luciano down, and then was still gassed out in the 3rd round. So I think Luciano is the more damaging fighter. She has better cardio, and I think that she will win this fight here. Alencar is going to need those takedowns. She can't win without it. She's going to be at a significant disadvantage on the feet here. So I'm going with the striker. I know her takedown defense, her get-ups aren't very good. We saw that exposed in her last fight. But I think that she'll pull off a victory here. And hey, guys, my theory, rematches go the opposite way. Well, the first fight was a draw. So the rematch clause doesn't really apply to this fight here. So it's really up in the air. And I'm going with Luciano to win the rematch here in this Brazilian women's showdown to start the card. Next fight is in the featherweight division. Jarno Errens taking on Youssef-Zalal. Odds for this one have Zalal minus 440, Errens plus 340. This fight is being disrespected, putting as the second fight on the card. I think this one is going to be entertaining. You got two solid guys here with the exact same record, 14 wins, 5 losses, 1 draw. Incredible that they had the same split there. But I think this line is wide, man. I can't believe how wide this line has gotten. The line just keeps continuing to grow wider, and I think Errens is definitely the side at over plus 300, near plus 350. We might even get 400 by the time the fight starts. And Zalal both guys looked good in their last fight, but Zalal, he came back to the UFC after a little hiatus. He beat up Billy Quarantillo on the feet, on the ground, just looked spectacular there. But I think people are putting a little too much stock into that performance over Quarantillo, while Errens, I think, looked tremendous in his last fight as well. A high-intensity back-and-forth striking fight against Steve Nguyen. And, Errens, I think, looks solid overall there. And if this fight is on the feet, I think it's going to be really close. Zalal likes that in-and-out striking style where he's using footwork and darting in and out with combinations and strikes. Errens is a little more traditional, but Errens throws hard calf kicks, and with Zalal liking that movement, you got to wonder, if Errens is able to land a few calf kicks here, how is Zalal's movement and legs going to hold up after that? And I think everything Errens throws is just, crisp, well-trained technique on the feet. And I think when these guys are striking with one another, it's going to be competitive, maybe a slight advantage to Zalal. Zalal definitely does have a grappling advantage here. His takedown arsenal is not the best, but it should be good enough to get Errens down. We have seen Errens struggle on the mat in his fights before the UFC and in his debut against William Gomis. Even though I believe he ended that fight triangling Gomis, which could have, swung the fight. But I just don't see Zalal covering over 80% here, man. I think this is a little disrespectful for Errens, and I think he's definitely worth a bet at over plus 350. But we might as well wait. Just wait till the fight happens and just see how far the line blows out, because I think it's possible we get a 400 here with the way this line is trending. And a really fun fight, man. I'm looking forward to that one there. The next fight is in the heavyweight division. Carl Williams taking on Jonathan Diniz. Odds for this one have Williams minus 200, Diniz coming back plus 170. Really simple fight for me here, man. I have Carl Williams here. I bet him minus 200, 2-unit bet. And comes down to takedowns. I mean, we saw Diniz get taken down and stuck on bottom for a long period of time versus Austin Lane, who is, not a wrestler at all. And he got an easy takedown there, and Diniz just looked horrible off his back. He gets up in round 2. They're on the feet. Lane is tired. Diniz lands a few strikes, and it's a knockout. But Carl Williams, he doesn't do a whole lot on top, but he is reliable to shoot takedowns and to get the takedowns, and he does it pretty consistently. He doesn't do a whole lot on top, but that's good because he's conserving energy. He's winning the rounds. He's staying safe. And I really think that Carl Williams needs 2 takedowns here to win 2 rounds. And I just think that he's going to get those takedowns. He's been reliable to do so in his UFC career so far. I believe he's got off to a good start, 3-0 in the UFC, won on the Contender Series as well against a big dog, as a dog against a wrestler. And I've just been impressed with his ability to consistently get the fights to the floor. He knows what he wants to do in there. He does it. He accomplishes it. And I just don't think that Diniz has the takedown defense or the get-ups, especially to stop the wrestling of Carl Williams here. So it should be a Carl Williams wrestling clinic. Probably a hairy moment or two in the second or third round, but then eventually he'll hit that takedown. But just not impressed with Diniz at all, and I think this Williams should wrestle his way to a W there. Moving on to the second of 3 women's fights on the card. Karol Rosa taking on Rosa-Kianzad. Odds for this one have Rosa minus 200, Kianzad plus 170. Another simple fight for me to break down. I mean, minus 200, Karol Rosa is not going to look that price when the fight is on the feet. When they're striking with one another, Rosa-Kianzad does have solid boxing, and I just think it's going to be much more competitive than 2-1 favorite for Karol Rosa. However, Rosa does have the ability to hit takedowns in her back pocket. We know Rosa-Kianzad struggles with defending takedowns and getting off her back. It's been a problem throughout her entire career. It led to her losing against Chiasan 5 years back. They rematched just a few months back, and the same result happened. She got taken down and rear naked choke there. So Rosa isn't exactly reliable to hit takedowns. She doesn't do it super consistently in her fights, but she does have that ability to do so here, and I think that's why she's a minus 200 favorite. I don't completely agree with minus 200, but then again, one takedown and Karol Rosa is probably going to be, in cruise control on her way to a victory here. So I have no interest in betting Kianzad. I mean, Kianzad I think is probably old, 37 years old. Oh no, she's only 32. That's surprising. She's had a long career. and I just don't see her being able to keep the fight vertical. And even if it stays vertical, she has to do enough to win the rounds. And Karol Rosa is a pretty high output striker on the feet as well. Kicks the legs a lot and has had multiple fights where she's landed over 100 strikes. So I think the line is perhaps a tad wide, but not wide enough for me to be interested in this one at all. I have no interest in that one. And just moving on. No, I'm not even going to look at the fucking props. That fight is certainly going to a decision. It'll probably be a Rosa 29-28. Moving on, bantamweight division, Charlampos Grigoriou taking on Toshimi-Kazama. I forgot to practice the pronunciation on that one. Sorry to Toshiomi Kazama and Charlampos, whatever the fuck, however you say that name. Grigoriou and Kazama here, minus 250 for Grigoriou, plus 210 for Kazama. Total bum fight here, man. These guys both suck. I mean, they both have yet to get a UFC victory, and they already have 4 losses. So they're barely even good regional fighters, let alone UFC fighters. They're definitely not going to be sticking around in the UFC. But Grigoriou is just a pretty basic orthodox striker, and Kazama is just a wild man who he fights like a crazy guy, but he doesn't have durability at all. His defense sucks. He's just a totally unskilled fighter. And even though Grigoriou laid an egg in his last fight versus Chad and Heiliger, even though he's a pretty basic, inexperienced fighter himself, he should be fine here to win the fight. But I can't get behind laying anywhere near minus 200 on Grigoriou. And this is, again, just another total pass fight. And we're moving on to the main card here. It looks like a 5-fight main card, according to Tapology. We're starting things off in the women's bantamweight division. Yana Santos, formerly known as Yana Kunitskaya, taking on Chelsea-Chandler. Odds for this one have Santos minus 143, Chandler coming back plus 123. So another low-level fight here, man. Yana's fights are always pretty boring. She loves pushing women against the cage, kneeing them in the thighs. Just total boring fights. And Chandler's fights aren't that different. She's a little more aggressive. She has a little higher initiative in there, but it's hard to see where Chelsea really has any advantages over Yana. But I just think this is going to be a competitive fight in all realms. It's going to be sloppy. It's going to be back and forth. Chandler is a pretty strong woman herself who likes, grappling and getting fights dirty in the clinch. So I don't think she's going to be outmatched by Janos. By Santos's strength in the clinch here, and I think they're probably just going to trade positions against the fence. Maybe whoever lands a takedown is going to win the round, and I just think this is going to be a close fight. It's certainly going to hit the scorecards here, and that leads me to believe that the fight ending by split decision is the best bet on the fight. My homie JT shouted this one out himself as well. Had to jump in on that. Plus 275 for ends by split. I mean, the line indicates it's competitive, right? Minus 143. It's a less than a 60% fight, okay? The line also indicates it's over 75% likely to go the distance. So if we have a competitive fight that is super likely to go the decision in the women's division, yet the end split is almost plus 300. I love that bet here. I think that's a really solid bet, and hopefully it comes home when we get that competitive decision. I really have no confidence in the money line here, but I would lean dog or pass out of the two. Santos, I don't think she's won a fight since having her baby. Yeah, she had a baby in like 2022. 2 losses since then. I don't even know how intensely she's training at this point, while Chandler definitely, I think, has a bigger, much more career upside. She's only gotten to the UFC recently. She's 2-1. I think she has, a brighter future ahead of her and a little bit higher of a ceiling. So I would say it's dog or pass on the Chandler side. Moving on to a short notice fight that got thrown together here this week. Chris Gutierrez taking on Kwang Le. Odds for this one, Gutierrez minus 550, Kwang Le coming back plus 400. This was supposed to be Gutierrez and Bashrat, which would have been a decent sparring decision there. Instead, Kwang Le filling in. I don't see anything from Lee that's going to give Gutierrez problems. Lee looks pretty small for the weight class. He looks like he has okay skill, everywhere, but he doesn't really excel anywhere. And I don't think he's going to have much for Gutierrez in the feet. Gutierrez is a very seasoned striker who knows how to limit the exchanges and control the range of the striking where he wants it. So I don't think Lee's going to have success there. That means that Lee's probably going to have to look to grappling if he wants to have any success. And I saw some grappling in his fights, but I don't think his takedowns are good enough. I don't think his strength and physicality is good enough. His jiu-jitsu is not really great. And this is also 1 week notice for Lee here. So nothing about Lee makes me think that he's going to give problems for Gutierrez here. So this should be a pretty easy layup for Gutierrez. But Gutierrez, man, he never pushes a tempo. He is totally content to go to a decision. So even though this is probably a short notice mismatch, it's still favored to go the distance. And, it's probably right because Gutierrez just doesn't do fucking anything to try to get guys out of there. The calf kicks, the leg kicks are his hardest strikes. And outside of that one time he kneed, Frankie Edgar's head off into oblivion, I don't think the guy's ever landed like a hard shot to the head. So yeah, I can't even get behind any props on this one. Unbettable fight, just like several other fights on this card. Next fight is another short notice fight here. We have in the welterweight division, Danny Barlow taking on Nikolai Veretennikov. A little bit of a rough pronunciation episode for me. Veretennikov, I don't know, whatever. Barlow is the favorite at minus 360. Nikolai is coming back at plus 295. And yeah, I mean, Nikolai looks all right. He's a decent striker, but the one thing I'm impressed about him is that he's fought the past 5 years in all good promotions. Recently he's fighting in something called Unified Fight League, which is an okay promotion. But before that, Fury FC, LFA, so he's fighting in good promotions, and he's been a regional fighter in those promotions for a long time. So, the guy's not a bum. I think he actually could win UFC fights. He does have some solid pop in his punches. But he's facing a very tough matchup here. Danny Barlow, very skilled striker. This guy looks really promising. He's quick. He's powerful. He has good eye for striking exchanges. And, I'm impressed with the guy. I had some questions about him in the last fight, and I think he answered some of them. He hasn't been late in fights too much. I think he's only been in the third round twice. But one of those, 3 times, 2 unanimous decisions, and then one in his last fight in the UFC where he knocked Quinlan out in the third round. And I believe he broke his hand or arm early on in that fight and still, pitched a shutout and knocked him out in the third. So even though Quinlan's a bum, I do think that was a solid performance. And it's just tough to see Veretennikov having much success here. I don't think his grappling is good enough to take Barlow down. And he does show a pattern of slowing down pretty often in his fights as well. And we saw that in the Contender Series versus Morales. And the odds are pretty shit on Barlow KO in the second or third round, but I do think that is a possibly very likely outcome here, is Barlow finishing him in the second or third. Nikolai's on short notice. He slows down. He's probably going to be the slower, worst striker of the two here, so I could see Barlow just getting him out of there in the second or third. That'd be the only way I'd be looking to play the fight. And that is going to move us on to the co-main event in the featherweight division, where we have actually a fun fight here between Chepe Mariscal and Damon the Leech Jackson. Odds for this one have Mariscal favored minus 235, Damon Jackson plus 200. Both these guys are wild brawlers. I think they're both a bit similar in a sense where I think they both are best at grappling, but they've both also worked on their striking over the years and have gotten a lot better. And, Chepe especially, I think he's gotten, much more technically sound, and he's not brawling as much and having as crazy hectic fights. And he's really matured over the past few years on the regionals and getting into the UFC. And he's, on a 3-0 run in the UFC. After all these years of grinding on the regionals, he finally got a chance in the UFC on short notice up a weight class, and he's made the most of it. Some pretty fortunate luck. I mean, he gets into the UFC fighting Trevor Peek, who sucks. He was kind of losing the Jack Jenkins fight in a competitive fight, takes him down, breaks his arm. And then the Morgan Charrier fight, I believe he lost that fight. It was close. It was competitive. A lot of people thought that was a bad decision. I thought so too. I did think that Charrier won the first and second rounds, but some favorable judging went Mariscal's way, and his whole UFC run has been pretty favorable in his favor. Damon Jackson, I wrote him off in his last fight. I thought that I didn't like what I saw against him against Billy Quarantillo. He started fast in that fight. He ran out of steam in the second and third, and I was thinking that, things weren't looking good for him. And then Damon Jackson bounced back with a solid win over Hernandez, probably getting the better of him on the feet and on the ground in that fight. His cardio looked solid. It looked like the old Damon Jackson who we're used to. So he had a good performance in that one, even though he is up there in age, 36 years old. I see this one being competitive, man. I don't think either guy is, technically sound enough to really outmatch one another in the striking or grappling. I think no matter where the fight takes place, it will be competitive. Both guys will have their moments, and I think it's just going to be a very closely contested decision here. So I do think the money line is wide. Damon Jackson 200 is a little disrespectful. I think maybe Chepe around like minus 150, 170 would be a little more accurate. So there is value on Jackson's money line, but I see a more valuable bet on this one. It is the over 2.5 rounds. I found it at a good price on FanDuel, minus 118. And I just don't really understand where they're getting all this finish equity from. So they have, Mariscal ITD at plus 160. Chepe KO at plus 220. What? That line to me is really confusing. Damon Jackson is not an easy guy to knock out. Dan Ige had to hit him with a ton of shots to knock him out. I just think that they see that Damon has lost by knockout 4 times, but one was an absolutely massive flying knee 10 seconds into a fight. One was Ilia Topuria. The other is Dan Ige. It's not like he's getting knocked out by bad fighters. He's getting knocked out by huge hitters with big shots, and I don't understand why they're favoring the KO for Mariscal at that narrow of odds. And I just think this one, based on that alone, I think that the finish equity is getting overrated here. And I think we're due for a competitive decision. So another fight where the split decision props might be good. And I just think, Damon's getting a little disrespected here, man. I do think so. So the over, I think, is my best bet, but I definitely wouldn't knock a play on Damon decision or any split decision props for either guy here. So it's a fun one there. I'm looking forward to that one. And we're moving on to the main event already. We're flying through this one. Might be the shortest Martian MMA podcast ever. Marcin Tybura taking on Serghei Spivac. Odds for this one have Spivac has the favorite minus 170. Marcin Tybura plus 145. Wow, what a confusing line in my opinion here. I don't really understand this one. I was sort of thinking that Tybura was the side when he was even money. Now the line has completely blown out, and I believe it was Serghei's second fight in the UFC. It was his third fight in the UFC where he fought Tybura the first time. It was right before the pandemic. And Tybura just used his size and kind of pushed him against the cage, took him down a few times, used his experience, and he just soundly and easily beat Serghei Spivac in every realm of the fight. The distance striking was slightly close, but it wasn't ever like Serghei was running away with it. And then, in the clinch and the grappling, Marcin Tybura won the fight fairly easily. He was, I think, a good amount bigger in there. Let me check the weights of what they were the first fight. Because that could play a factor, because Tybura is the heavier guy. I think he should be, 20 pounds heavier. Well, Tybura weighed 246 the first time, and Spivac couldn't have been much less than that. Let's see. 234, so 12-pound advantage, but Tybura's, I believe, put on a little weight since then, and so has Serghei. Serghei weighed 256 in his last fight, while Tybura weighed 247. So actually kind of about the same for Tybura, but Serghei has put on, over 20 pounds. So that's interesting to see how that's going to play into this one here, but I just think that Marcin Tybura is the better fighter of the two, man. I think he's had the much better UFC career. I think he really knows how to get the fights in his favor a little bit better, and I think his wrestling is a little better. Serghei Spivac's wrestling is very reliant on upper body stuff, where he goes in for a clinch and tries to get you with a trip takedown or a judo throw. I think Tybura can do that as well, but also has a little bit better takedowns on the legs. A little more freestyle wrestling style takedowns with the single leg and the double leg. I don't think either guy is going to be hitting clean takedowns on one another here, but if they're clinching with each other, they're trading back and forth. I think Tybura has a little bit deeper of a takedown arsenal, and either guy could really put each other in a bad spot on the ground. We have seen both these guys, mostly Tybura, I would say, get stuck on bottom and eat some strikes. I mean, he did the first whole round of the Romanov fight. He was on bottom, absorbing a lot of shots there, but rallied back in that one to win the second and third round. And I just trust Tybura's cardio a little bit more. I just like everything about Tybura in this spot. I mean, it's not like he has an easy path to victory to just run away with it, but considering the first fight, how easy Tybura won that one, considering just their overall UFC careers, how they've been looking lately, I trust Tybura more here, man. And the fact that this price is going the other way is strange to me. I don't understand why. Maybe there's some big bettors back there, that are liking what they see from Spivac. Personally, I don't see it. And I've liked Spivac throughout his career. I've been a Spivac truther, if you will, throughout a good portion of his career. But I don't see it here. I really don't. I maybe that they're seeing that Serghei is younger. He's 29 compared to 38 for Tybura, and people are saying, 9 years younger, that we're betting on him. I don't understand it personally. I think Tybura is the side easily here. I'll be picking him to win the fight. In terms of a method of victory, I really have no clue. I would lean decision as the most likely. The fight is, plus 150 to go the distance, but I could see, either guy could ground and pound each other out late with them being tired and stuck on bottom. But I like Tybura here from a money line perspective, and that'll do it. Not exactly a riveting week of fights to break down, but I like Jarno Errens as a big underdog for a bet. I like Carl Williams as a favorite for a bet. I like the split decision prop in the Yana Santos-Chelsea-Chandler fight. I like the over 2.5 rounds in the Chepe Mariscal and Damon Jackson fight, and I like Marcin Tybura's money line in the main event. So only real 5 betting spots on this card I like. Short card, shit card. Hopefully we will bounce back with a big exciting card with the Australian pay-per-view going down next week. But thank you all for tuning in on a little bit of a slow week. Hope you all enjoyed the podcast, got some good information. Hope you all enjoy the fights and win some bets this weekend. I'll see you all before the next UFC card next week. Peace out, everyone.